Hello and welcome everyone to the Trialogues podcast. My name is Taylor DeWald. I'm coming to you from Thought Faucet World Headquarters at the Howard Space Center in Burlington, Vermont. I have with me my friends and cohorts, Rob Hahn and Matthew Shadbolt. Why don't you guys say hello to the audience?
Hey everybody, this is Rob Hahn, 7DS Associates. I'm coming to you from Houston, where we have an actual space center, but unfortunately my office is not in it. And I'm really excited to be talking with you guys. It's been a really interesting couple of weeks.
Hey everyone, my name is Matthew Shadbolt. I'm coming to you from Manhattan, and I'm the Director of Interactive Product and Marketing at the Corcoran Group, which is Manhattan and Brooklyn's largest real estate brokerage. We are currently the owners of the space shuttle here at the Intrepid Aerospace Museum. That's my related space shuttle, space exploration comment here.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool when it flew across the Hudson. It was, you know, when you actually see the space shuttle fly through New York, it was mind-blowing. Absolutely incredible.
And before we leave the topic of space, I just want to point out that SpaceX, Elon Musk's firm, had its first successful launch, which I believe is the first time that a private company has launched a rocket into space. So I'm looking forward to the days when we can do space tourism, and you know, I can take my grandkids on some tour of the moon or something. You know, it's amazing what technology is doing for us.
In the related news to that, did you see this guy this week that's going to jump from like 120,000?
Yeah.
Did you see
that
news?
It got delayed yesterday.
The first person to break the sound barrier in Freefall. That's what they say it's going to be.
Did he do it? I haven't.
No, he didn't do it.
He didn't do it yet. The weather was too gusty. I wouldn't want to be gusty if I was breaking the sound barrier wearing a spacesuit and falling from a balloon. But
amazing times.
Yeah, totally. So, Rob, word on the street that you had some interesting conversation at one of your Here at Direct events.
Yes, I did.
Around the ever popular topic amongst us Gen Xers of Gen Y. That's
exactly. And so, you know, as some people may know, you know, I'm a minority partner in a company called Here at Direct, and you know, we put on these consumer focus group conferences. And I just never thought like Trialogues. You know, I didn't want to come on and talk about that too much because it felt a little bit too much like, you know, pimping my own wares. But I got to tell you, like this time, I think there's stuff that came out of this conference, and I just thought we have to talk about this, right? So, you know, forgive the, you know, seeming,
maybe we'll have like a cutaway with someone
but that's not the intention.
Dance around or something like that, and promote tickets or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll find other channels to try and promote ticket sales and product sales and all that. But this really is something I thought is worth for us to talk about. So, just as a little bit of background for people who aren't aware, Here at Direct is a conference that Sue Adler, my friend, and I have started. You know, really trying to bring the consumer's voice to real estate. You know, our thought was, you know, we have quote unquote experts like me, you know, getting on stage and telling a bunch of people, you know, here's what the consumer wants, and it just was never satisfactory to us. So we wanted to actually hear directly, you know, from actual buyers and sellers. And we had our third event in Southern California in Irvine just this past Monday on the 1st. And it was mind-blowing. And I learned something new at every one of those things. But the specific panel I wanted to talk about was the Gen Y panel. We actually did a panel of Gen Y buyers and sellers. I think we tried to get a renter, but, you know, we couldn't locate one that, you know, was worth putting on stage in any event. And it was just an unbelievable experience. And it's hard to sort of try and describe what happened. So I'll try it, and then I'm probably going to ask Lindsay, who was there as well, to kind of see, you know, get her thoughts on it. Essentially, of the 5 panelists, and they were all, I want to say, in the early 30s, so they're kind of on the front edge of the millennial, of the Gen Y generation. 2 of them turned out to be investors, and one of them, I think either she was a doctor or her husband is a doctor, very well educated, very professional, kind of what we expected for Southern California because it is a high rent district. It's not if you're going to buy homes there, you're probably in the upper echelon of the income brackets. And literally, pretty much the entire panel, except for one woman who had a really great experience, they caused a massive controversy. I mean, we had realtors practically climbing out of their chairs to go, quote, ask them questions or, challenge them. So let me try and kind of put it in some sort of ordered thought. And it went something like this. It turns out that all the tech savvy, all of that is true. Most of them said that they did most of their own research. They know how to use the tools. And at least in a couple of the cases with the investors, they were actually accessing tools that a lot of realtors don't. One of them had a subscription. He actually paid for a subscription to RealtyTrack. This guy was actually going and researching public records, through California state, information resources to find out things about who owned the title to what and, what sort of, if there was a notice of default that's been filed on a particular property. They were both running their own analytics. They weren't relying on anybody else to do that for them. Making sort of the investment to purchase decisions. And they were really professional. I mean, they were really, really smart. And both of them essentially ended up saying that you guys, meaning real estate agents in the room, are irrelevant. And they think it's just a matter of time before the real estate agent goes the way of, say, the travel agent. That may be useful for some very specialized things, but otherwise, just really not that useful. And it's just a transaction cost that they're sort of willing to accept because that's the way things are. Both of them ended up, suggesting that really the realtor to them was nothing more than lockbox because everything else they can get themselves and everything else they can do themselves and do it better than, a real estate agent. Mind-blowing. I mean, absolutely mind-blowing. And then the third, the doctor or the doctor's wife, this young woman, essentially ended up laying the wood to her agent. And essentially what she ended up saying was, this agent apparently refused to show her any properties that was in the range that she and her husband wanted to pay because they had qualified for a higher mortgage. So this agent essentially told them, you don't want to see those houses. I'm only going to show you these houses that are, $300,000 more. And this young woman was actually furious, right? That, it was sort of like, look, you work for me, right? I don't work for you. I say this is what we want, and it's your duty to show it to us. And she was just laying into not just this woman, but then by extension, sort of the industry at large, essentially accusing, the realtors of being, I want to say it's sort of a combination of lazy, stupid, and self-interested. As you could imagine, the room sort of erupted and much conversation was had, and I think we could get into some of the details of that. But, that's sort of it ended up being some of my biggest takeaways from it. But I do want to hear from Lindsay, our producer, who normally doesn't talk on these things. But because you were there, I kind of want to ask if, what you heard and if those are kind of fitting in with what your experience was.
The thing is, what I think was interesting was the reaction of the audience, and it's kind of disappointing, I think. There was such tension in the room, and I think it surrounded this notion that we aren't necessary. And I think rather than the audience taking some time to really think about what is my value to these folks, there was anger. And if you listen to what some of them said, they're almost offended at this notion that we're just auto-emailing listings. They're like, I get listings everywhere. That's not valuable to me. So they're really wondering, what is our value? And I don't know how many agents really spend a lot of time thinking about, what is my value to these folks? They are super, super educated. These guys were doing tons of research, and they knew more than their agents.
Yeah. And I just wrote a blog post about this last night, and I realized a couple of things there as well. I mean, one of the investor guys, he pretty much admitted, it's like, look, I'm rich. My parents have money, I have a job that most of my peers don't. He's a controller. I mean, he works in finance, for a major company. And his whole thing was, he felt that the real estate agents he had worked with were simply not that smart and didn't work hard enough. I mean, he basically said, real estate agents, in my view, are stupid and lazy, and it's just a transaction cost. And he figures it's just a matter of time before technology or other advances just make it unnecessary.
Well, I think that's what one woman said. That one woman said, this gal did a great job of being a friend, not such a great job of being a real estate agent.
Yep. So there's a lot there, but the topic, I think, for us is, I want to frame it in this way. Clearly, the first reaction we're going to get from something like this, I think, on the part of brokers and agents in the industry is denial. Right? I think the first reaction we're going to get is something very similar to, a comment that Bill Loveland posted on Raise the Bar, which is, look, I don't know what these people's experiences are. It was just 5 of them. It's not representative. We can sort of safely ignore that. My take on it is I don't think so. Even if we assume that, some of these people that were there aren't the elite, we're talking about the top 5%, top 10% of the millennials of the Gen Y. My feeling is we actually have to pay more attention to them because, as you guys probably know, my personal feeling on millennials is that they're really screwed as a generation. The economic factors that weigh against them is really heavy. It's really big. So therefore, out of that generation, the folks who are going to be buying houses, who are going to be in that market, who have the ability to do it, I think is the elite. In other words, I don't imagine that a Gen Y millennial who doesn't have a college degree is going to be looking at buying houses anytime soon. And then if you look at the college graduates, because of student debt problem, because of the employment problem, because of the general economic malaise, I would say that most of them aren't going to be in any sort of home buying mood anytime soon, which means we're left with a narrow, upper echelon, truly elite. A lot of them who live in New York City, by the way, Matthew, so you're probably familiar with a lot of these guys. And if their view of the real estate agent, of the real estate industry, is that they're stupid and lazy, we got a major problem headed our way. So that's kind of how I want to frame it. What do you guys think?
Well, I'll jump in here, seeing as you nicely segued with the New York City mention there. I mean, nobody likes to be told that they're doing a crappy job, right? Everybody likes to think that, you just look at a normal average realtor bio, everybody's awesome. And, everybody, gives all their money to charity, loves dogs, loves to cook, on local associations and all this kind of stuff. So, the tough love that, I think you guys, experience there is finding value in that is actually incredibly helpful. Nobody really likes to hear it, but, in many ways, I think it's necessary that kind of stuff is heard. Whether you choose to act on that feedback, if you like, is entirely up to you. And Rob, you're suggesting that the feedback needs to be acted on. Some of the discussions that are currently happening online are suggesting, perhaps due to things like sample size and that kind of stuff, is suggesting that it shouldn't be listened to or not at least acted on. And I think there's really the rub is how you choose to react to something like this. And then I think the thoughts that you articulated in the blog post that resulted from this about performing agents or higher performing agents having some kind of moral imperative to, take business from underperforming or crappy agents is sort of an interesting way to phrase the value proposition of that kind of feedback, I think. And one that's going to continue to struggle to resonate with people inside of something like the Raise the Bar group. But what's really happening, I think, is based on this, is actual Raise the Bar type conversations. When you actually hear it from the customers very bluntly and very directly that, not only is the perception of the industry bad, but here are specific examples of what happened to me, and here is, I am somewhat reflective of the type of people within that particular generation that can even afford to have a home purchasing type of conversation. I think it becomes of absolute critical importance to to listen to it. Whether you act on it or not is a different type of conversation, but denying it is risky, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple things on that I think are really nailed in, because normally I would be one of the first ones to jump in and start talking about sample size, particularly with regard to Hear It Direct, and we take a focus group of 3 people and how do we extrapolate to that to the universe. That there is danger in that approach. However, it is exactly like you're saying there, Matthew, in that the other side of this equation is that how many realtors or real estate agents are the customers likely to interact with. And if someone has never worked with a real estate agent before and then chooses to work with one, and if their first experience is bad, they're going to be unlikely to have future dealings with real estate agents. So it's sort of like on the sample size thing, it ends up being one of like, well, we need a lot of sample size to determine like the state of the industry. Yes, but how it matters to that individual person, it really does come down to like 1 and 2. It's sort of like that, that quote: "A million deaths is one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic." And if these people were being let down by whomever they were working with, because we all know that there are good agents, right? We all know that there are agents out there that probably could have provided value to these people, even though they were very well educated or whatever. There would have been some agent that was like one step ahead of them that would have been able to further augment their abilities. It's just that they didn't find that person, or that person didn't find them. And for the industry or whatever, then that's a shame. The other side of it is, well, if most of the industry can't offer that level of service, then what? So I think there's some really important issues there around what is that singular experience. You're just going to have one. What's it going to be like, and how that has an impact on the industry as a whole. And I'm not normally. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, like I'm not normally one to go along with the idea of like certifications and stuff like that for different things, because I kind of think that they typically don't have as much value except to the people who sell the certifications. But to some degree, that does raise that issue of, well, if there are people out there who aren't doing a good job, it reflects poorly on the industry. So that it raises an issue that I'm not willing to go down that route as being a good idea, I don't think, but it's worth talking about anyway. The other, there was couple other aspects of what you're describing, Bob, that I thought were interesting, and one of them is every, we could apply the statistics side of the real estate industry kind of oversampling or whatever for negative. We could apply that on the consumer side as well. If you had a panel full of very well educated, high research, really wanted to be involved in the process kind of people on stage, how many people in that generation are capable of doing that? Not everybody is a financial controller at some large organization or whatever. Not everybody is there. So there may be opportunity to serve with different kinds of customers, or customers who simply, even though they have the capability to go that far to do all the research, but they just don't have the time or inclination to do so, and therefore are truly hiring someone to perform a service for them. But I think that, again, it also ties into what you're saying, Rob, about what Gen Y's economic future looks like in terms of their college debt and that kind of thing. In terms of the economy, economy goes up and down, and we all live in the economy regardless of what generation we're in. So I'm not sure that has as direct a role in their case, but I do feel that they're being asked to take on an incredibly large amount of debt, at the college level and so on. So that there's probably some interesting stuff there. I think you're right to say that if we were to imagine a future in which there's fewer people are actually able, for whatever reason, to afford a house, then the few that are able to afford a house, you need to offer some unbelievably amazing level of service to, with the idea that people buy more than one house. I mean, I guess it's just like dealing with a first-time customer, right? So, if you want to have a lifetime customer, you have to treat everybody like they're going to be a lifetime customer, and that's not dependent on your age or or your intelligence or your experience or anything else. If you want to have a customer for life, you got to treat them like that from the get-go. And these people didn't see that value with their experiences. And I think there's a lot of stuff going on in there. I'm getting a ping here that says that Lindsay wants to jump in and say some stuff.
Yeah, let's jump in just kind of generically because I think not just about the Gen Y panel, but the response was so interesting as I was walking away talking to people like, what did you think? This is why I don't think sample size in this particular case is interesting. I was getting people saying things like, well, this doesn't really apply to me. My business isn't like that. Thank God I don't treat my clients like that. And kind of having this, it seemed really easy for them to say, yeah, this isn't really about me. Rather than taking the opportunity to listen to the panel and say, what are the opportunities here? What kinds of questions can I ask myself about my practice, given what I've heard that can improve my practice? Like when you hear an entire buyer panel say that they were in multiple offers every time, they were losing out to cash buyers, like I know that just sending that person listings probably isn't enough. And am I doing that? And I know a lot of people are doing that. What are they doing then to really support the effort of finding a buyer a home? Are they going out and finding the listings themselves so that buyer's not in a competitive environment? Are they asking themselves those kinds of questions rather than just saying, well, that terrible experience, thank God my clients don't have that? There's just too many opportunities really to ask yourself new questions about your practice that could improve it just by listening to these guys.
Yeah, Lindsay, I think you're totally right, but the challenge there, and Matthew alluded to it, is that when you're confronted with some really negative feedback, the first thing people just try to do is distance themselves from it, and they're either going to distance themselves from it by saying that this doesn't apply to me, and they're going to run away from it, or they're going to freak out and be like, you people are wrong, or whatever, and have some kind of aggressive response to it. So it's sort of like the emotion, having to confront it publicly, that level of criticism directed theoretically at them or their industry. There's a lot of emotional stuff there. I bet a lot of them probably woke up the next day and said, geez, I wish I would have taken the time to ask this question or that question. But people have emotional responses to information like that.
Well, so, I mean, I think there's so much to unpack, and it's clearly, we're not going to get to it in this, one podcast, but let me try kind of unpacking it this way. I mean, first of all, just to what Lindsay said, I think that's actually the biggest danger, right? Because, again, one of the panelists literally said that, you guys are kind of like used car salesmen. I mean, literally said that. And I'm sitting here going, so if you're an agent, you're in that audience, and you're saying to yourself, well, I don't got to worry about these crap agents out there because, I do have a great practice, and I do buyer consults, and I take care of my clients, and my clients love me. And I sit there and I think to myself, do you really want to be known as the best used car salesman? Right? Is that a good thing for you when you're dealing with purchases that are, hundreds of thousands of dollars? My initial instinct to say it's not a good thing. You don't want to go there. You don't want to end up in a place where you say, well, I don't need to worry about this stuff. It's all these crap agents that are running around, but, I'm the best used car salesman out there. I don't think that's where we want to end up. So I'm in agreement with Lindsay in terms of, doing more. And I don't know that it's necessarily just, how I can improve my practice. This was sort of the theme of my post on it. If you have a superior practice, you really kick ass and your clients love you and you provide a really high level of service, my take on it is you need to take the next step and start driving all of the crap out of the industry. And, look, it could be, happens in the RTP stuff, talking about education levels, this, that, and the other thing. I'm not convinced that that's the solution here, primarily because if we are saying that the next generation of consumers, the most important generation, the Gen Y, because let's face it, we're all kind of Gen X here. We don't count, right? Just from a number standpoint, we don't count. We're not big enough to matter to the economy. Gen Y is. I guess my takeaway from all of this is that we can almost write off 80 to 90% of Gen Y simply because of economic factors, simply because of some of these other things that's going around right now. I don't see them even having the ability to buy a house if they want to, right?
Or the inclination.
So you really got to.
Or the inclination. I think there are changes, social perceptions in the value of owning a house.
I think that's entirely true too. Because a lot of these guys were teenagers when their parents lost their house, right? So I don't know that they associate home ownership with some sort of a real positive American dream. But I'm willing to buy into the argument that they still believe in home ownership as part of the American dream. But belief and desire is not the same thing as buyer demand. Buyer demand has to then couple with ability. And I see too many signs right now that suggest that's simply not going to be there for them over the next 10 years. So I'm going, okay, rip out the finance controllers. That's fine. So let's just look at who are the elites in our society right now. Who are the elites of the Gen Y who are likely, in any sort of large numbers to be buying houses? In my opinion, they're all professionals. Right, and Matthew, you started talking about this in Manhattan. I lived there for 7 years. I know what it's like. It's hard to stay and live in Manhattan and think about buying a house if you're a barista at Starbucks. It's impossible, right? So you got to be thinking like investment bankers, lawyers, doctors, accountants, finance professionals, business executives. We're talking about 26, 27-year-olds, or kids are graduating from college today into the worst job environment ever. And they're somehow able to convince, a company to give them a shot. Well, you know what? Those guys are all smart. They're really with it. They know what the hell they're doing. And because they've been successful their entire lives, they're used to a certain level of service. They're used to a certain level of competence in their lives. So in a really weird way, what I'm saying is I think the important takeaway here is this. We've been saying for 5-6 years that real estate, the future of the industry, is going to be dictated by the Gen Y. But the focus has been something like this. Gen Y likes to talk via text, right? They're a texting generation. You better go get yourself an iPad if you want to continue to have a business because the Gen Y is really tech savvy. What I'm saying is, based on what I've heard at Here Direct, based on what I've heard at the other two, it turns out that they are tech savvy. They're super tech savvy. And yeah, they do like text. They like email. They like all those things. But it turns out that all of these technology tools that they're very savvy with, all of this education, all of this intelligence that this next generation has, means that the value of the real estate agent is not going to be coming from the fact that they have an iPad. It's just not. It's going to have to come from something else. And I think that something else, based on what we're hearing, is going to be a much heightened level of service. And I don't know that we're there yet. But I don't know that as an industry that we're at that point. People pay lip service to it, but I don't know if they truly believe it. The second part of this, then, from my standpoint, is something like this. Given the sampling issues that Gaylord's talking about, a lot of these guys, at least the 3 on this panel and a couple from some previous panels, had such a negative experience with working with a real estate agent, such a poor experience that they're not going to take the time, right, to distinguish between, well, you're a great real estate agent, you're not a great, they're just not going to do it, which means that the culture of cooperation, if you will, the culture of comedy, the culture of sort of let's not make waves because we have to work with these people in the future is going to destroy real estate if that remains in place for the next 10, right? That's kind of my big takeaway on it.
Okay. Well, there's so many points in what you just mentioned, Rob, but let's just focus in on 2 things: the technology versus customer service, and then agents that appear that have the perception of their own customer service being somehow above this kind of level of conversation. What's interesting to me is your proposal that those, let's call them higher performing agents, right? What is perhaps considered to be a currently successful agent, right? Somebody that has like a large client list and does good business throughout the year. What you're proposing is that those people aren't safe based on what's coming, and that the crappy agents still have a very, very strong capacity to devalue the customer service proposition of the top performing agents, because those crappy agents are painting the entire industry with that same kind of brush, right? So what you're actually suggesting is, not only should there be almost like a little bit of a civil war, if you like, between agents that can perform and agents that can't, but it's more of a call to action to the top agents rather than the underperforming agents. And that's a really, really key difference between the majority of the current conversations about things like raising the bar, is how do we, which tend to be focused more on how do we get average agents or underperforming agents to be better, rather than how do we get everything to be better. Do you see what I mean? There's like a difference between those two things. So a lot of those things, as they relate to technology, to segue into the other bit of this, a lot of those things related to technology are focused on things like productivity and apps and social and mobile and video and all the rest of the kind of things that touch the customer in new and exciting ways. But at the end of the day, of course, and this is not a new conversation, the level of customer service has not only got to be raised, but it's absolutely critical for everyone. Like, nobody is really safe from that conversation, however strong their current referral network might be. And it's nothing to do with technology. Technology is sort of a means towards that customer service. But the important thing is that the crappy agents have a very, very strong capacity in the consumer's mind to devalue everyone. And that's really the issue, I think.
I think you're on to something with that on technology as well, Matthew, where it's really like all this, like the kind of conversations about technology that we typically encounter in the real estate industry are about pressing buttons in software or on hardware, and that's like table stakes, right? It's just like a way to communicate. It'd be like telling someone like, oh man, if you don't have a cordless phone, man, you're just going to be out of the loop. So get your cordless phone. And when it's really not that, it's what we do with the technology that matters. So I do think that there is some value in some of the tech cheerleading that has gone on, just because a lot of these technologies are incredibly new to an aging population of agents or whatever. When I don't want to be ageist about anything, but they always talk about the average age of an agent being somewhere north of 50 years old or something like that. And I think there's some value in making sure that everybody can get onboarded to use whatever technology is out there, simply because it is table stakes. I think where the problem comes in has been where discussion of like this using certain kinds of technologies is like going to be the thing that saves your business. And it's just, it's not. People first, always. And then there's also, I think one of the things that Lindsay brought out earlier is really important and shouldn't be lost in all of this. And that's how the really interesting thing at an event like what you're describing, Rob, with the Hear It Direct panels, and I haven't been to Hear It Direct, but I know we did something very similar to this, at the Data Summit, where you have a small focus group and a large audience. And one of the real values is actually not so much hearing what the people on the stage say, what that small focus group that's hand-selected in some way, but seeing what the response is. It's almost like an anthropology, right? You go to some different location and observe different people, and you end up discovering more about what you personally feel is valuable. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunity is in terms of figuring out what to do. Because some of it is we could sit around and complain about agents all day, and I'm fortunate most of the ones that I've met are, I think must do a good job because they're making money and they seem like they're decent people or whatever. But the real thing, if you want to make some kind of changes, how do you onboard? How do you get people from feeling angry or frightened at hearing bad news on stage from someone else? How do you get them from that emotional state to one that, like what Lindsay was saying, like, boy, they really miss an opportunity to ask some interesting question? How do you get them from dealing with that emotional response to actually taking some action to improve their business? And not necessarily just from a I have to get certified standpoint, on the one hand, or maybe on the other hand, it's brokers saying, okay, I'm going to stop working with agents who don't, meet this certain level of quality, and they define quality however they define it. I don't know, but those are two things I kind of wanted to throw into that mix. That, the tech's important, but it's just table stakes, and people need to be onboarded.
I totally agree, Gaylor, because that level of disruption that you're talking about is always incredibly uncomfortable for those being disrupted.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that they need to be thrown away, right?
Absolutely not. The question is whether you are nimble and adaptable enough to make those changes, or whether you continue to remain firmly entrenched in your current position. And we see this all the time, right? We see it with Borders versus Amazon, with Blockbuster versus Netflix, with BlackBerry versus iPhone, with Facebook versus MySpace. We see it all the time, and it seems to be a culture that's absolutely accelerating, fueled by technology, right? And I mean that in the web and devices in all their different forms. And the thing that's really, really interesting, I think you're dead right in terms of the reaction of the audience is just as fascinating as actually what is going on stage. I mean, you see that kind of stuff at industry conferences. The Pinterest for Realtors sessions are standing room only, whereas why people can't get mortgages is sparsely attended in the room next door. And you see that there's this disproportionate focus upon technology as a direct means to solving the industry's woes. And of course, it's like I said before, it's not a new conversation regarding customer service, but it's really how you put those things to work for you in a way that is going to make you work harder and smarter and in a much more client-centric way. I think so many of these, and we hear it from Rob and Lindsay's account of the event, a lot of it is being taken personally and being taken from a very agent-centric perspective. The fact that a client can pull their own analytics is astonishing to me, that something like that would be something that they would even think to do. But that's really, really scary for people that can't even do that. So the client is starting to do things that the agent can't even do themselves. So there's a level of disruption many times over with that kind of stuff. And I think it's whether you choose to adapt to this stuff or not. And I think one of the things that sort of comes to mind with me is about whether you choose to see the future and adapt to it or not. And when we came up on the anniversary of Steve Jobs' death last week, they changed their homepage, and it was like a video of Steve's life. And there's a quote that Steve Jobs quotes from somebody else about how Apple was guided through its product development. And it's something that always really resonated with me in terms of how to think about disruption. He quotes Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player Wayne Gretzky, where he says, "I skate where the puck is going to be, not where it's been." And it's just like a very, very simple way of sort of illustrating sort of how to really work with this kind of stuff, especially with technology. And it's always been sort of like quite a guiding principle at Apple, according to Jobs, and he talks about it at length in his book. And I think it's a really good guiding principle for these kind of discussions as well. You either choose to see it and work towards it in a way that, where it's going to be, or you don't. And I think more and more there's examples of people that aren't doing it and aren't adapting and aren't nimble enough. And those businesses are becoming casualties. I mean,
so then the challenge for us, I want to throw one in here on it. The challenge then for us, if we're to take Rob's imploring us one of the early episodes of Trialogues to like, what are we going to do about it? If it's true that a high degree of adaptability is going to be required to survive in a changing environment, which I think is pretty safe bet, and that currently not enough people are prepared for that, what do we do? There's the one side that we hear about with like certifications and so on to like weed out the ones who aren't adaptable. But I don't think it's not like adaptability traits or having the mindset, like the spirit to be able to adapt, it's not like there's a checkbox that you can say, oh, this person's like that or isn't. It's not easily testable whether someone has that capability or, to do that kind of stuff. So I don't know that.
Honestly, where I'm at, gentlemen, and I think Matthew kind of hinted at this, is Civil War, right? I'm actually at that point, and I think that was the point behind, my blog post, and for a variety of reasons. But let me work my way to the argument through this. I agree with everything you guys have said, up to this point, and it's a major issue. It's going to be something that at least I think about and write about and talk about, quite a bit going forward. The specific issue with technology, though, is this. Based on what I have heard, I don't believe that technology is going to be any kind of a solution to the problem that exists. Let me give you an example of what I mean. And Lindsay touched on this. One of the very specific things that these Gen Y consumers were telling us was, why are you wasting my time by sending me this list of listings, right? And you think about how the industry is structured right now, how we think about that right now, and it's sort of this, get a whole bunch of leads and then somehow get them to sign up with you so you can start sending them, emails of listings that, quote, fit their criteria, right? Well, what these guys are saying is, I don't need a list of random listings. What I want is tell me why you, the realtor, why you think that this house is right for me. Now, and I sat there and I thought about it, but it's so obvious, right? It is such a simple solution to the issue of value. But I don't know that there's a technological solution for that. In other words, that literally takes an agent to understand the client and to take the time to go look through, the listings that come up, that the search engine spits out, and then crossing out ones that don't fit, and then highlighting the ones that do, and then telling the client why, right? To me, this is nothing short of just actual hard work, elbow grease, and hard work, right? And actual, service. That's what it is. So I don't know. Right now, if I sit back and I think about it, I go, I guess I feel like the natural inclination would be something like, well, that's a lot of hard work, so we should try and find some sort of technology tool that'll make that easier. Maybe some sort of an artificial intelligence, a recommendation engine that reads through the client's Facebook profile or whatnot and comes up with, 3-4 house matches based upon, some algorithm. And I think about that, I go, well, if you do that, then the algorithm has value. The realtor does not. So I don't know that that's the solution, right? If you think of it that way and say that technology is actually not going to be able to provide the solution to the issue of value that only arises out of service and actually working hard, then that's not going to, be the thing. What then leads to is the Civil War issue. Here's kind of where I'm at. I don't know that the industry, I don't know that consultants like you and me, Matthew, should help the crap agents. I guess the bottom line is, I don't know that I'm interested in helping the ones who are not nimble, who can't adapt. I don't know that I'm interested in allowing them to continue to be in business.
The entire real estate consultancy industry is predicated on doing exactly that, I think.
Exactly. And it's not just the real estate consultants. I personalize it to me and Gaylord, but it goes now to the hands of brokers, for example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that most brokerages, and because we know this because brokers tell us, right? 80% of their agents do no production. They know that half of their agents are crap. They know it, but they're not willing to take the step of saying, therefore, we are not going to associate with you. We don't want your money. In fact, we don't want you handling a client because you suck at it. You're no good at it. You only see them as a walking wallet. We don't have that right now in the industry, right? And I understand the sort of the motivations behind that. I understand the incentive structure. I understand all of it. What I'm ringing the bell about is you continue down that path, and within the next decade, as the next generation rises up and takes the place of, the boomers and all these people, you know what? They're going to paint the entire industry with that brush and say, you guys are worthless. You're useless to me. So I almost feel like it's self-preservation, if nothing else. If an agent or broker out there is not sufficiently motivated by the moral component of real estate, meaning helping a family go $350,000 into debt to buy their house to fulfill their dream, and making sure that they get the top-notch service and every bit of help that a professional can provide, if that's not enough moral sort of compunction to do it, to do a great job, then there has to be some self-preservation element to this. Because you continue the way things are right now, my feeling right now is within 10 years, the real estate agent will go the way of the travel agent because they're not that valuable. They're useless. So it's not just consultants. You think about associations, right? Realtor associations today are essentially structured and built to protect the weak, to protect the crappy agents, and with all the teaching and the lessons and learning and this and that and the tools and so on and so forth, as opposed to empowering the great agents to take market share away, right? That's how it's built. You look at the ethics complaint process, it's built that way. You look at brokerages. I mean, all of that. So, I mean, I know I'm ranting a little bit here, but, man, it's something that really crystallized something I've been thinking, and we've all been sort of talking about this for years.
Absolutely.
It's almost,
And you're right to rant, Rob. I mean, it's serious. It's a very, very serious issue that's like you said, beginning to crystallize for many in the industry. And, I think it's really, really important to, like I said before, skate where the puck is going to be. And that type of discussion is starting to come into focus as Gen Y people begin to tell us exactly those things.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable to hear. But as that generation begins to really enter the marketplace in a very large way, in a very serious way, and it's only really a subset of that generation that we can even have that conversation with about our value proposition. It becomes very, very serious and rightfully passionate on both sides of the argument, for and against, I think. And where it has to come down is, what do you do, right? Do you take a stance of saying, like you said before, driving the crappy agents out of business, which is very risky for a lot of people predicated on keeping those people in business? Or does everybody have to raise their game, including the top performers, to make sure that the real estate industry actually starts to stand for that level of customer service that Gen Y is actually not even asking for, they're demanding it? And I think that is sort of like a critical point in this type of discussion.
Bottom line is I think it's both. In other words, on the one hand, the great agents out there, they need to just buckle down, step up, and start taking business away, right? Because the fact is, if you're a great agent, you can't lose that customer, right? You have a relationship, they're not going to leave you. If you're a crap agent, you deserve to lose that customer. So on the one hand, the great agents need to step up. On the other hand, I think this is the piece, this is the revolutionary thought. This is the thing that's going to be really uncomfortable. We got to cut our losses. Right? We have to cut our losses. We as an industry, and the brokers that are out there that are working, they're competing with each other, the agents that are out there working and competing with each other, I am saying you do not have the luxury of allowing a crap agent to take a client in this environment, because that client is going to have a crap experience, think that the entire industry has no value, and 5, 6, 7, 10 years from now, we're not going to get the chance to get them back.
Yeah, so Rob, I think you're right about that, because what we're looking at is the idea that it's not about losing potential customers to your competitors. It's about losing potential customers from the market entirely, right? Is that correct? It's like
exactly.
It's not like oh, they went to the guy across the street because the guy across the street did a better job or offered the right stuff. The market ceases to exist because they decide to opt out. The customers decide to opt out of the market, and so that paints a pretty clear picture for your Civil War thing. But the issue is then again, it brings us back to so there's the business models of everything are all kind of misaligned to handle that, and we've talked about that in previous episodes. And then there's a couple other like little questions that keep going on in the back of my head when we describe, drumming out the people that are no good and all that. And obviously people who are no good should find something that they're more capable of doing. On the other hand, where do the new agents come from? Like assume, someday the agents that are alive today and are the top performers are going to die out, and who's going to start? Like, what's the training program going to be like to onboard a new agent? Because unless they're born that way, or they're just like, it's just based on you're born a great agent, you show up, you're a great agent, and therefore you get to be a real estate agent. Like, is there any kind of training at all? So that's kind of one answer to that, but that's the concern that I would have about saying we're going to just draw a line in the sand and everyone who sells less than this is no longer going to be an agent. Like, that would be the part that would concern me, is that, well, obviously the ones who've been doing it and they haven't, performed or whatever, that's going to be obvious. Maybe it just doesn't work out. But there's going to be people in that population that could be better, but for whatever reason aren't. And is it worth trying to work with them? What it obviously is going to come down to whether they want to figure this stuff out, like be adaptable. But there's also beyond that, there's what do you do with new agents? How do you get new people into the field? And I think that'll be a really critical aspect of how something like this would come about. And then there's another one too, another issue that kind of chews in the back of my mind, which there's a lot of fear about the idea that an experience with a bad agent then results in losing that customer and that customer spreading, bad vibes about the real estate industry. But is there some reason why it's not happening with the good agents? Why that good vibe from the good agents isn't spreading, or is it just that they're so outnumbered, that so many more people? So I guess where I'm going with this is the total number of transactions that involve an unsatisfactory experience from a bad, we'll call it bad agent. There's so many more of those than there are transactions by good agents. I guess we can assume that there are, because since there can only be a few top performing agents in any market, there's going to be fewer of them. But if the vast number of transactions are being done by people who actually do a lot of transactions, then why isn't that positive vibe of the industry spreading? Is there some kind of mix and match there? And I think we'd probably need to sit down with some real spreadsheets or something to figure that out. But that's something that I think is worth considering. And then the last little thing I guess I'd throw out there, which would probably be its own, probably better to talk about on its own Trialogues podcast, because it's a little bit different than what we're talking about today. But on the idea that technology itself isn't useful at all. On the one hand, I totally agree. It's table stakes. It's not the important part. People and service are the important part. That said, most of the technology today that people talk about is marketing technology and promotion technology. To offer an extremely high level of service, perhaps there needs to be an equivalent devotion of attention and resources to internal technology, and not just like an algorithm that repeats the process of what an agent does, but whatever technology it is, usually a good CRM system. And the whole CRM world, not just in real estate, but everywhere, is totally, screwed in so many ways, because you get an industry that's supposedly about customer relationship management, and you can look in any one of the top packages of software out there, and none of them has a field labeled strength of relationship. So it's obvious that even the things that call themselves CRM tools today are really just about sales. So it's all this technology that's focused on the outside, when perhaps we need to be looking at technology focused on the inside. Absolutely. Even at that level, it's really got to be focused on service and people. But I think that could be its own podcast or whatever. It's more interesting to talk about right now, anyways. Your idea of civil war.
I totally agree, Gaylord. That this idea of internal technologies fueled by customer service that are customer centric. I think that's a real thorny issue that I think a lot of folks are wrestling with. But just to go back to the new agent thing, I think you raise an excellent point about the onboarding of the future of the industry. And, it occurs to me, as I'm listening to you describe that kind of environment, outside of, good agents versus crappy agents, the new agent conversation is really, really important. And I don't think that we have a climate where the real estate industry is an aspirational profession, that people go to school or grow up as children thinking that they're going to be in the real estate industry in the way that they would with other professions. And I think a lot of that is to do with the perception of the industry. And many people within the industry currently it was not their profession of choice. It was, it's either second, third, sometimes even more choice of career. And while that doesn't mean that it isn't rewarding for them or it's not something they enjoy, very often it's not the first choice of profession. And I think that's sort of symptomatic of the kind of things that you're talking about with new agents. But I know that there are wrinkles in that argument for sure, and I know that commercial is definitely part of that. We hear a lot of that from the Corcoran agents, especially here in Manhattan, that people do actually go from college straight into commercial, for example. But I think it's a very interesting time. As the year begins to round out, a lot of what we traditionally see in the tech and marketing and productivity kind of space is we see a lot of new product launches in January. And I think a lot of people within our industry are beginning to tire of that kind of conversation in favor of the one regarding higher levels of customer service and actual attraction and retention of clients. And Gaylord, you make a great point about the data issues and the problems of CRM and stuff like that. And perhaps that's an issue for next week.
Yeah, and we literally could spend the next year, talking about all the different things that's coming out of this conversation. I guess we'll consider this as the touchstone of something that I think we're all going to be sort of obsessed with. I know I certainly will be, because there's so many aspects to it. I do think I'm having trouble wrapping this up, if you will, because I know we're kind of at the end of our time, simply because the topic is so big, it impacts everything. So I guess I'll do it this way. I do think that most of the conversations that's currently happening in real estate outside of, a very small circle is totally worthless in light of what we are seeing, what we are hearing, and what, quite frankly, we're experiencing. In the sense that, right after the event, I went and asked some of the brokers and agents, were you surprised by these horror stories you're hearing from consumers? And not one of them was. Right? In other words, the people who work in the industry understand, they recognize that there's a lot of bad agents out there who are providing a really crappy level of service and embarrassing the entire industry and ultimately putting the survival of the industry itself at risk. They know this. And yet, the sort of conversation is around marketing, around lead generation, around sales, all the stuff that Gaylord was bringing up. So I do think that if we could, have some small part in changing the topic of the conversation to not being so much about, the status quo and everything will be fine, into really taking these things seriously, I think we would have done a service. I mean, I don't know that the three of us can come up with any answers, on a podcast especially, at least not in 1 hour. If we could, we should be paid a heck of a lot more than we are, right? But I do think it's important to raise the topic, ask the questions, and start dealing with it. I think that's all we can hope for right now. If this is going to change, then it's not going to be the three of us. It's not going to be, 10, 15, 20 people.
Hold on, Rob. I got to stop you there because that's what everybody understands. That's what every agent in that room that was there, that's probably what they said too. You know what I mean?
Well,
and I'm not saying we have to have a result today, but I'm saying that, like, if we go down that road of the three of us can't solve this problem, that's the same road that everybody's been doing, You're right. You're absolutely right to call me out on it. So let me rephrase it this way.
It's on everybody.
Let me rephrase it this way. The three of us aren't going to solve this problem in this podcast.
Right. There you go.
The three of us will, however, at least I will certainly give it a shot, try to solve this problem and try to lead the discussion, to try to lead the revolution to make it happen. I mean, what else is there to do? Right? Otherwise, we're all going to be working somewhere else. And believe me, I have tons of ideas and thoughts on, how some of these things can be fixed, new agent problem, all of that. But again, we're not going to solve it in this podcast. So Yeah, thank you, Gaylord, for reminding me that I don't mean to sound defeatist. I don't mean to sound, like throw our hands up and, we can't do anything about it. No. What I'm saying is we're not going to solve it here. I'm saying we're going to start this here.
I think it represents a huge space of opportunity for innovation.
It's enormous, and not just innovation in terms of technology, innovation in terms of business practice, innovation in terms of service, innovation, just innovation all around. Yeah. And you know what? We're going to have to convince people. We're going to have to recruit folks to, seeing things our way. And quite frankly, in light of the whole Civil War conversation, we're going to have to defeat people who think differently, who think that things are fine the way they are. And I think that's a worthwhile venture, for, a couple of guys and a podcast, So I don't know if that's like a mission statement, but I think it's something that we'll be thinking about, talking about, and actually trying to put into action, going forward. That's my take on it, guys. I think it sounds great. It's a heavy podcast, so we're not going to end with, weather reports and whatnot. I know we're at the end of time, so
it's raining.
I just want to say I'm honored to be in this venture with you fellas, and look forward to pushing this ball uphill.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Take care.
All right, take it easy, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
It's the magic number.